I'm John Curtice, Professor of Politics at the University of Strathclyde, and I've been here talking in the Politics Department about the extent to which Brexit and people's views about Brexit seem to have changed some of the traditional patterns of voting in British voting behaviour. And the principal conclusion that I've come to is that indeed, in many key respects, both the Conservative and the Labour parties have gained ground in the first case amongst those who voted Leave, who tend to be people who are relatively socially conservative, relatively concerned about immigration, but who are people who are not necessarily belonging to the kinds of demographic groups who traditionally vote Conservative. And at the other end of the spectrum, the Labour Party has tended to do relatively well amongst those voters who voted to remain, many of whom are graduates, as well as undoubtedly most of them being younger people, but who again as a result are therefore not necessarily people whom we particularly have traditionally associated as being the typical Labour voter. And as a result of this, as a result of the Conservative Party in particular now having an electorate which is strongly pro-Leave and decidedly anti-immigration, this creates a fascinating question about how the party is going to manage the tension, given that traditionally it's a party that's in favour of big business and therefore has tended to be in favour of free trade and a liberal market, but which that party now has an electorate in the form of predominantly Leave voters who wish primarily to control immigration and are much less concerned about free trade. And that is potentially a tension that is going to dog the Conservative Party throughout the Brexit negotiations. But equally, of course, the Labour Party, although predominantly and now perhaps even more clearly a party the majority of whose voters voted to remain, the majority of whom are socially liberal and not concerned about immigration. However, there is still a decided minority of the Labour vote, people who are left-wing but not necessarily socially liberal, people who tend to be older working-class voters, which the party would still want to hang on to, frankly would like rather more of them to vote for it. And therefore there's still also potentially a tension for Labour between how far does it decide to differentiate itself from the Conservatives by saying that we're relaxed about immigration and we really want to maintain a close relationship with the single market, how far it's willing to do that, and how far it has perhaps a somewhat more ambiguous position in order to try to keep both Remain and Leave voters on side. So it does suggest, A, yes, the 2017 election did, in important ways, change the traditional patterns of support for both Conservative and Labour, but in so doing has arguably left both those parties with something of a headache about how it manages, or how they manage, the rather disparate electoral coalitions that they've acquired as a result.